Picture this. It's a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp, golden dawn that usually makes you thank God you're alive. But instead of the gentle rustle of wind through 80-year-old cornstalks, I'm jolted awake by the mechanical scream of diesel engines, a sound so violent it felt like my house was being shelled. And I look out the window to see 3 yellow bulldozers tearing through my family's legacy like it was nothing but wrapping paper. My name is Elias Thorne, and last April, I watched a woman named Veronica Sterling Vance try to turn my grandfather's life work into a spillover parking lot for her luxury SUVs, all without asking permission, without offering a dime, and purely because she believed her homeowners association bylaws superseded the United States Constitution. To understand why my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird that morning, you have to understand the soil those machines were desecrating. This isn't just dirt. It's Thorne Heritage Farm, 47 acres of prime Kentucky bottomland that my grandfather, Silas Thorne, carved out of the wilderness with a mule and an axe back in 1943, surviving the tail end of the Depression and every recession since just to hand it down to my father, and eventually to me. For decades, we were an island of tranquility, surrounded by other farms. Until 5 years ago when the Peterson place next door sold out to a conglomerate that erected Oakhaven Heights, a sprawling complex of 200 cookie-cutter McMansions where the grass is measured with laser levels and the residents look at a tractor the way a vampire looks at a crucifix. My life had been quiet, especially after my wife Sarah passed away from cancer 18 months ago, leaving me alone in the farmhouse with nothing but the ghosts of our memories and the daily rhythm of the harvest to keep me sane. But that silence was shattered the day Veronica rolled into town. She was the freshly minted HOA president, a 47-year-old transplant from a gated community in Connecticut who drove a pristine white Mercedes G-Wagon that had never seen a speck of mud, and she treated rural life not as a community to join, but as a savage wilderness she had been divinely appointed to civilize. It started small, the way these nightmares always do, with noise complaints filed because my rooster, General Lee, apparently didn't respect her wellness sleep cycle at 5 a.m., followed by passive-aggressive letters about my barn needing a coat of paint that matched her community's grayish aesthetic, even though my property isn't part of her HOA. She escalated to hiring a drone photographer to document my unsightly farming equipment, claiming my 1985 International Harvester tractor was driving down property values just by existing within the line of sight of her balcony. But I brushed it off, thinking she was just another bored suburbanite who would eventually find a new hobby. I was wrong, dead wrong, because Veronica wasn't just bored, she was a tactical nuke in designer heels, and her declaration of war came while I was attending Sarah's memorial service, a low blow that tells you everything you need to know about her moral compass. While I was standing at my wife's grave, Veronica was standing before the Oakhaven County Planning Commission with a slick PowerPoint presentation, arguing that my front acreage was actually an used buffer space that was creating a fire hazard and, for the safety of her residents, needed to be paved over to provide emergency vehicle access and overflow parking for her subdivision's clubhouse. I returned home, eyes still swollen from crying, to find bright neon orange survey stakes driven into the heart of my cornfield, severing a 200-foot strip of my land, as if she had already conquered it. And when I walked out there, my boots sinking into the soft earth, I found a certified letter taped to a stalk of corn, not mailed, but taped to the crop she intended to destroy, informing me that, due to historical boundary discrepancies, the HOA was reclaiming its rightful property and I had 48 hours to vacate the premises. The rage that filled me wasn't the hot, flashing kind. It was cold, the kind that sharpens your vision, so I grabbed my deed, which had been notarized when Franklin D. Roosevelt was in office, and I drove straight to her house, a monstrosity with columns that looked like they belonged in Rome, not Kentucky. She opened the door wearing tennis whites, holding a glass of iced tea, and smiled at me with that condescending pity you give to a slow child, saying, "Elias, darling, I know you're emotional right now. Losing Sarah must have been hard, but my husband Richard is a partner at Vance & Partners, and his legal team has found significant errors in those old hand-drawn maps you cling to." She practically patted me on the head, telling me that fighting this would cost more than my farm was worth, and that I should just be a good neighbor and accept the inevitable. implying that my grief was making me irrational. And that was the moment, right there on her porch steps with her fake boxwood topiaries mocking me, that I decided I wasn't just going to beat her. I was going to dismantle her entire world brick by pristine brick. I went to the local paper, the Oak Haven Gazette, and spoke to an old friend, Jason Trent, who ran a front-page story titled "Suburban Goliath Crushes Grieving Farmer," which went viral locally, generating hundreds of comments from people who had bought corn from my stand for decades. But Veronica didn't care about public opinion because she believed she was untouchable. She doubled down, filing a petition to rezone my land from agricultural to residential, a move that was purely diabolical because it would skyrocket my property taxes from $3,000 a year to nearly $15,000, plus a retroactive back tax penalty of $50,000 that would be due immediately. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had looked at the public records, saw the medical debt Sarah's treatments had left me with, and calculated the exact amount of financial pressure needed to force me to sell the land to her husband's developer buddies for pennies on the dollar. I sat in the zoning meeting, wearing my flannel and work boots, listening to her lie to the board about how my farm was a public nuisance and a traffic hazard, watching the board members nod along because they were dazzled by her charts and afraid of her husband's law firm. And for a terrifying moment, I thought I was going to lose everything my grandfather built. But then, the harassment turned physical, resulting in the scene I described at the start, with bulldozers rolling in under the cover of a fraudulent emergency permit she had pushed through during the Christmas holiday when the regular clerks were on vacation. They ripped up rows of heritage corn that were genetically unique to this county, crushing months of labor and decades of history into the mud. And as I stood there screaming at the foreman, a guy named Mike Dozer Kowalski, who looked genuinely apologetic as he showed me a permit with a forged signature, I realized legal defense wasn't enough. I needed a nuclear option, something buried deep in the paperwork that she had overlooked in her arrogance. So I went to the county archives basement, a place that smelled like mildew and forgotten secrets, to find Arthur Artie Penhaligon, a 70-year-old clerk who hated Veronica because she once tried to have his parked car towed for being too rusty. Artie pulled out the original development charter for Oak Haven Heights, dusting off a leather-bound folio that hadn't been opened in 5 years, and as we pored over the fine print, his eyes went wide behind his thick glasses, and he whispered, "Son, you just won the lottery." What Artie found in those dusty archives wasn't just a loophole. It was a loaded gun sitting on the table waiting for someone to pull the trigger, specifically a forgotten clause in the original Oak Haven Heights Charter known as the Greenbelt Preservation Covenant, Section 14, Paragraph B. It stated in plain, unarguable legal English that the development was required, mandated, to maintain a strict 200-foot agricultural buffer zone between their residential lots and any existing heritage farms. And here is the kicker. The penalty for violating this buffer wasn't a slap on the wrist. It was an automatic, non-negotiable fine of $2.5 million, plus the full cost of environmental restoration, payable immediately to the injured party, me. But it got better, or worse depending on how you look at it, because Artie, bless his heart, started digging into the HOA's current financials and discovered that Veronica had run the association into the ground, racking up $1.8 million in debt renovating the clubhouse with Italian marble and installing a heated pool that nobody used, meaning the HOA was technically insolvent. The only reason they hadn't collapsed yet was because Veronica was secretly negotiating a backroom deal with Heartland Retail Group to sell that very buffer zone, my land, for a strip mall, a deal that would bail out the HOA and net her a massive consulting fee, which explained why she was so desperate to bulldoze my corn before the fiscal quarter ended. I took this information to Catherine Ross, the toughest lawyer in the tri-state area, a woman who eats corporate attorneys for breakfast, and when she saw the documents, she didn't just smile, she laughed, a terrifying sound that signaled the end of Veronica's reign. "Elias," she said, leaning over her mahogany desk, "we don't just stop them, we let them dig their own grave. We let them document their own crime, and then we bury them in it." So we waited, which was the hardest part, watching her bulldozers tear up more of my land day by day, feeling the phantom pain of every snapped cornstalk. But we needed the destruction to be undeniable. We needed her to commit the felony of willful environmental destruction of a protected covenant, so that the penalties would be maximum and irreversible. Veronica, sensing victory, started getting sloppy and vicious, escalating her attacks to break my spirit before the final sale. And one morning I went out to the barn to start my tractor, Rusty, only to find the engine seized solid because someone had poured 5 pounds of sugar into the fuel tank. A sabotage job that cost me $8,000 and felt like a punch to the gut. Then came the anonymous letters, cut-and-paste jobs threatening that accidents happen to stubborn people, and the mysterious health inspectors showing up at the restaurants that bought my produce, trying to shut down my revenue streams, all orchestrated by Veronica's minions. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday night when her husband, Richard Vance, showed up at my door, dripping wet in a $5,000 suit, trying to play the reasonable man routine. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Sarah and I used to drink coffee, and slid a check across the wood for $2.1 million, telling me it was a generous settlement to make all this ugliness go away, implying heavily that if I didn't take it, the accidents would get worse and his law firm would bury me in litigation until I died penniless. "Think about your future, Elias," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "You're alone out here. Farming is a dying industry. Why fight the inevitable progress when you can retire to Florida?" He didn't know I was wearing a wire, taped to my chest under my flannel shirt, recording every veiled threat, every admission that they knew the buffer zone was legally mine, but didn't care, and every detail of their plan to defraud the county zoning board. I pushed the check back to him and said, "My grandfather cleared this land with an axe. Richard, I don't think he did that so you could build a Starbucks." And the look in his eyes shifted from arrogance to a cold, reptilian hatred as he realized I wasn't for sale. They ramped up the pressure, hiring private investigators to park outside my house 24/7, shining floodlights into my bedroom windows at night, trying to induce a mental breakdown. But they didn't realize that every act of harassment was just adding another zero to the lawsuit I was preparing. The climax of their stupidity happened when Veronica called an emergency HOA meeting to force a vote on the commercial expansion, lying to her own residents that the deal would lower their fees, when in reality, it was just a frantic cover-up for her embezzlement. We had everything we needed: the wiretap audio, the original covenant from Artie, the forensic accounting proving the HOA was bankrupt, and the video evidence of them bulldozing the protected zone. I called Elena Vega, an investigative reporter from the city news channel who had been itching to expose the corruption in Oak Haven County, and told her, "Get your cameras ready, because tomorrow morning, the devil is holding a town hall meeting." Catherine, my lawyer, filed the emergency injunctions in federal court at 9 a.m., triggering the EPA and the state attorney general, while Mrs. Higgins, the 80-year-old town librarian, and my unexpected spymaster, rallied the neighbors who had been secretly fed up with Veronica's tyranny. The trap was set, the cheese was in place, and the rat was about to walk right in, thinking she owned the maze. The day of reckoning arrived with the atmosphere of a public execution, the community center packed to the rafters with angry residents, terrified board members, and unbeknownst to Veronica, half a dozen federal agents in plain clothes blending into the back of the room. Veronica Sterling Vance stood at the podium, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and looking like a dictator addressing her subjects, spinning a fairy tale about how the new lifestyle center, her code word for the strip mall on my cornfield, would bring prosperity and eliminate HOA dues forever. She was mid-sentence, pointing to a rendered image of a parking lot covering my family's cemetery, when the doors burst open, but it wasn't the police yet. It was me, walking down the center aisle with Catherine Ross on one side and Arthur Artie, Penhaligon on the other, carrying a box of files that looked heavier than a tombstone. The room went dead silent, the kind of silence where you can hear a pin drop, as I walked up to the microphone, ignored her screeching demands for order, and turned to face the neighbors. "Folks," I said, my voice shaking just a little before finding the steel my grandfather put there, "you're being lied to, and you're about to be bankrupt." I laid it all out: the $1.8 million debt, the secret deal with Heartland Retail, the embezzlement of funds into Richard's law firm, and finally, the Greenbelt Preservation Covenant. When I announced that I had just filed a lien against the HOA for $2.5 million plus damages, and that under the bylaws, every single homeowner in the room was personally liable for a share of that debt because of Veronica's negligence, the room exploded into chaos. People were screaming. Veronica was hammering her gavel so hard it broke. But the real showstopper was when Agent Miller from the EPA stepped forward, flashed his badge, and announced that the destruction of the wetlands bordering my farm was a federal crime carrying mandatory prison time. Veronica tried to run, actually tried to bolt for the side exit, but the sheriff, who had been waiting in the hallway, blocked her path, and seeing the handcuffs slap onto the wrists of a woman who thought she was a god was a level of satisfaction that no amount of money could buy. The fallout was swift and brutal, like a scythe through dry wheat. Veronica was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for fraud and environmental crimes. Plus, she was ordered to pay restitution that guaranteed she'd be driving a used Honda for the rest of her life. Richard was disbarred and is currently serving 2 years for witness intimidation and conspiracy. His fancy law firm dissolved in disgrace, and the Heartland Retail Group pulled out of the deal so fast they left tire marks, getting hit with a $5 million fine for their part in the scheme. But the best part wasn't the revenge, it was the restoration, because the court ordered the HOA to pay for the complete rehabilitation of my land, hiring specialists to replant the heritage corn and rebuild the soil structure better than it was before. The penalty money, which came out to nearly $3 million after the dust settled, cleared my debts, paid off the farm's taxes for the next century, and allowed me to establish the Sarah Thorne Agricultural Scholarship, a fund that sends kids from farming families to college, ensuring that the legacy of people who work the earth isn't forgotten. The HOA was reformed, led now by a sensible accountant named Derek, who actually lowered fees and treats the farm as a community asset, even organizing an annual harvest festival where the suburban kids come over to learn where their food comes from. I still wake up early, sipping my coffee as the sun comes up over the replanted fields, and sometimes I walk out to the property line where the survey stakes used to be, now replaced by a sturdy oak fence and a plaque dedicated to Sarah, reminding everyone that some things aren't for sale. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? In a world where developers treat land like a ledger entry and community leaders act like feudal lords, how many other Veronicas are out there right now, bulldozing over someone's history because they think nobody has the strength to fight back? Is it justice that she's in prison, or is it a tragedy that it took a wiretap and federal agents just to protect a man's right to his own home? Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you've ever had a neighbor from hell who tried to steal. What was yours? Drop your story below because I read every single one. If watching a corrupt tyrant get absolutely wrecked by the legal system made your day a little brighter, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe. Because on this channel, the little guy doesn't just survive, he wins.